I stood in front of the glass doors of Summit Luxury Bank, the place where I had signed the first documents for capital expansion. A branch listed under my company's partnership portfolio. A place that should have recognized me. But when I pushed the door open, the air inside slowed as if I were a stranger. My suit was smooth. My tie was straight. The documents in my inner pocket were complete. Yet the first look I received skimmed over me for a single moment, before sliding toward two other customers at the deposit machine. I walked up to the counter. Lauren Matthews looked up when my shoes touched the stone floor. Her hair was pulled tight, her hands resting on the keyboard. Her eyes paused at my collar before dropping to the older phone in my hand. There was no greeting. I placed the withdrawal slip on the glass. I need to withdraw $15,000. Lauren opened the ledger beside her. Her finger stopped at the amount for just a moment. Then she looked at the ID. I slid through the slot. I need to verify with a manager, she said. Her voice is even slower than necessary. I didn't say anything else. I simply looked toward the glass behind her, where a white man in joggers stepped out with a thick envelope in his hand. He moved through the counter without effort. No one called for a manager. Lauren closed the ledger. The fold was firmer than it needed to be, making a blunt sound. "Please wait for a moment," she said. I stayed still. A figure approached from the back office. Rachel Whitmore. Gray blouse. Nameplate bright under the lights. She looked at my ID, then up at me, scanning from head to toe. No frown. Just a silence held a little longer than it should have been. "How much do you want to withdraw?" she asked. $15,000. Rachel looked again at the documents I provided. She flipped the first page of my company file, paused at the header for just a moment, then closed it. She didn't read the rest. "I need additional verification," Rachel said. "I withdrew more than that at this branch before. Today is different." She said it slowly. Not sharp, not soft. Just as if reading from an unseen instruction sheet. Rachel lifted my ID. She tilted the card under the light, turning it left and then right, as if waiting for something on the surface to disappear. Behind her, Lauren kept her eyes on the keyboard. Her hands stiffened slightly when Rachel set the card down. Rachel angled her head and spoke quietly into the radio. I couldn't hear the words, only saw her lips press for a moment before releasing. Brian appeared near the back door. Security. His uniform shirt stretched across his shoulders. His belt sat high. He looked at Rachel. She said one short sentence. Brian nodded without asking anything. Rachel turned back to me. "Sir, please step outside." I stayed still for one moment. "What's the reason?" I asked. Brian answered for her. "You are causing concern for the staff." His voice carried no emotional pitch, just words dropping one by one, like a routine he had repeated countless times. His hand lifted, settling near his hip, not touching anything, but placed where an invisible boundary formed. "I've provided all documents," I said. "I've made transactions here for more than 10 years. Brian stepped closer. "Please exit the building." Customers in the lobby began turning their heads. An older man stopped mid-path. A woman paused for a moment before veering in another direction. Brian placed his hand on my shoulder. Not tight, but more than necessary. He pushed me away from the counter. The glass door opened. A cold gust swept in. I was led outside without a single official explanation. When the door closed, Brian dropped my ID onto the concrete. He didn't hand it back. He didn't return it with respect. He simply let it fall. The card landed face down. The sound was small, but clear. I bent down and picked it up. A scratch on the corner caught the dim sunlight. I straightened up and looked through the glass. Rachel had returned to her screen. Lauren kept typing. No one looked outside. I held the ID in my hand. The door opened again. I thought Brian had returned to say something. But no. Someone else stepped out. Terrell Hayes. His older security uniform was slightly uneven at the shoulder. He held the documents I had left on the counter. "You left this?" he said quietly. I looked at the edge of the file. One corner is slightly bent. Maybe someone had pushed it before closing the ledger. Terrell handed it to me. I didn't want them to lose it. His voice was low, unhurried. We stood side by side. He looked into the building, then back at me. "They've done that to others," Terrell said. A woman brought an insurance check. They said it was fake. She sat in the lobby for more than 10 minutes. No one approached her. He didn't smile. Didn't grimace. Just spoke like describing something he saw. "Why are you still here?" I asked. "My kid is at daycare. My mother is on dialysis." Terrell lifted his shoulder slightly. "I'm just trying to stay steady." I put the ID back in my wallet. Inside, Rachel said something to Lauren. I saw Lauren nod. Brian was no longer at the counter. I took out my phone. The screen was old. I dialed. Just 4 taps. I held the phone to my ear. "Raymond," I said, "come to the Wabash branch." My voice is even. Straight. No raised volume. There was a brief pause on the other end. "I'm coming," he said. The call ended. I looked at the glass door again. Everyone inside kept working, but I saw Lauren glance out for one moment, as if unsure of what was about to unfold. Terrell looked at the phone in my pocket. He didn't ask. I didn't speak. Wind moved across the sidewalk. The signboard lights reflected on the door, merging my shadow with the shadows inside. Except they didn't know I had once sat at the conference table of this place. A black car slowed at the end of the block. I recognized it the moment the headlights swept across the pavement. The car stopped. I didn't walk toward it. I simply stood there. Some people believe they know who belongs. Until my phone vibrated once, and the order inside shifted. Until one call turned everything. And sometimes, have you ever watched a room realize they underestimated the wrong person? The black car stopped at the curb. The headlights faded slowly. I stood still in front of the glass doors. My ID still in my wallet. Terrell looked at the car, then at me. Not asking anything. Just a brief moment of stillness. The car door opened. Raymond Ellis stepped out. Charcoal suit. Dark tee. Italian shoes polished enough to catch the streetlight. He scanned the area once before heading to the door. Not turning toward me, just giving a small nod. I walked behind him. No words. When the glass door opened, the sound inside the lobby dipped for a single moment. Lauren stood behind the counter, her eyes flicking toward us before dropping to her screen. Rachel was leaning over her tablet, but straightened immediately when she saw Raymond walk in. Raymond didn't look around long. He moved straight to the counter as if he already knew exactly where everyone was. "Rachel Whitmore," he said. Rachel lifted her head. Her chin rose slightly, but her eyes held a brief pause she couldn't hide. "Yes, sir." Raymond pointed at the counter where Lauren had set the documents down. "Explain why Mr. Cole was asked to leave the building." The room fell silent. A man signing papers by the deposit machine froze for a moment, then stepped aside. Rachel opened her mouth. There was an inconsistency. Raymond cut her off instantly. "No." He didn't raise his voice. Just one word. Clear and cold. Lauren stood behind her, hands clasped under the counter. I saw her blink a little faster. Raymond turned to Lauren. "How did you handle the previous transaction?" Lauren didn't look at me. "The customer withdrew $20,000. I verified his ID and approved it." Raymond looked back at Rachel. "Explain the difference." Rachel took a shallow breath. "I was following procedure." Raymond placed his hand on my file. His fingertip pressed along the edge, making a clean line. "The bank's procedure does not require calling security when a partner withdraws within the limit. It does not require removing the customer. And it does not require dropping the ID on the floor." I saw Rachel's shoulders stiffen for a single moment. Brian appeared at the back door. But the second he saw Raymond, he froze. His hand stayed on the door frame. He didn't take another step. Raymond looked his way. "Come here." Brian walked out, his shoes making small, muted steps across the floor. He stopped 2 paces from Raymond. Silent. "You were the one who instructed Mr. Cole to leave the building?" Raymond asked. Brian swallowed. "I was told by management to assist." Raymond looked directly at him. "You put your hand on him." "I only wanted to keep everyone safe. No more." Raymond cut him off, his tone unchanged. The room held no other voices, only the printer and scattered button clicks from a corner desk. Raymond turned back to the counter. "Pull up Mr. Cole's records." "Now." Lauren touched the keyboard. Her hand shook for a moment before steadying. She opened the account page and shifted it onto the secondary screen. Raymond leaned in slightly. All documents are valid. No errors. The words fell, changing the entire room. I stayed still. I didn't step in. Raymond turned to me. Do you want to say anything? I waited. I said, as I always do. Raymond gave a small nod and turned back to Rachel. You are suspended immediately. Rachel opened her mouth but couldn't form a word. She froze for a moment, then lowered her eyes to the counter. Lauren stood behind her, her expression shifting. Raymond looked at her next. You will be reassigned temporarily. Full review. Lauren nodded, her eyes fixed on the edge of the counter. Raymond turned to Brian. You will be placed under disciplinary review? Effective now. Leave your post. Brian didn't argue. He stepped back once, then walked into the back office. The door closed without a sound. A small mini-cliff moved through the room. Tiny, hesitant footsteps. Then everything slowed again as if waiting for what would follow. Raymond scanned the room. Where is Terrell Hayes? Terrell walked in through the glass door behind me. He stood straight, not stepping in too close. Raymond nodded. Your name? Sir, Terrell Hayes. Raymond looked at him for a moment, then said, You are promoted. Branch Security Supervisor. Pay increase. Report tomorrow. Terrell didn't speak. He simply gave one small nod. Raymond turned back to the counter. Process, Mr. Cole's withdrawal. Lauren entered the command. The money counter started. The sound steady. The envelope came out sealed after a moment. Raymond picked it up and handed it to me. No more delays. I took it. I didn't open it. The room held its silence. No one spoke. No one looked directly at me. Only an older man in the corner kept his eyes steady for a moment as if committing something to memory. Raymond closed his tablet. Done. I gave a slight nod. Terrell stepped aside as I moved toward the door. A small, instinctive gesture of respect. Unspoken. As my hand touched the door handle, Lauren said quietly, without looking at me, Sir, I'm sorry for... Raymond cut in immediately. No need. I opened the door. Cold air slipped into the space between us. Behind me. No one followed. I stopped at the curb. The envelope felt heavier than it looked. Terrell stepped out a few seconds later and stood beside me. I opened the envelope, took out one bill, folded it, and handed it to him. Not because of what you told me, I said, but because you said it. Terrell accepted it without bowing his head. He simply held it. A bus passed by. Its brakes hissed. The wind from the road brushed across us. I looked back at the glass door. Inside. No one looked outside. Raymond was speaking to the temporary manager. Lauren stood still with her hand on the counter's edge. Rachel was no longer in the room. I turned away. And a very simple truth slipped through my mind. Not about me. Not about the money. Just a lingering question. Have you ever watched a room realize they dismissed the wrong man? The street wind brushed lightly against my collar as Raymond closed the glass door behind us. Terrell stood beside me, the promotion letter still in his hand. The lights from the signage reflected on the bank's glass, revealing movement inside. Faster, now. More rushed. As if everyone had just realized something they couldn't fix with an apology. I turned back toward the branch. Not long. Just a single moment. Rachel was no longer at the counter. Lauren stood beside the temporary manager. Her eyes locked on the screen. Her hands typing through procedures that were likely mandatory. Brian stood in the back corner. Hands clasped in front of him. Shoulders lowered. Without the posture of someone in charge compared to 10 minutes earlier. Raymond stepped out and stood between us. He looked at Terrell first. Tomorrow. Report to the central branch. All promotion and salary documents have been signed. Terrell nodded. No smile. No words. Just holding the appointment letter firmly. As if afraid someone might say it didn't belong to him. Raymond turned to me. Do you want to see the disciplinary reports? I don't need to, I said. Raymond nodded once. Then looked at the glass door. Rachel is terminated immediately. Files forwarded to headquarters. Brian is dismissed. Not allowed back in the system. Lauren is reassigned temporarily. Under continuous review for 30 days. His voice didn't push for effect. He simply stated the outcomes. Clear. Specific. Without any detours. I gave one nod. Raymond held my gaze for a moment, as if checking whether I had anything left to say. When he saw I didn't, he opened the door. We stepped back into the lobby. The room quieted instantly. Lauren turned toward us, her hand pausing on the keyboard. The temporary manager straightened. A customer near the deposit machine shifted his stance, then looked again. I stood 3 steps from the counter. Not closer. Not initiating conversation. Raymond stood beside me. I looked at Lauren first. I am Derek Cole, I said. My voice even. Co-founder of Envisage Technologies. Capital partner of Summit Luxury Bank. The person who signed 3 expansion agreements for this branch. Lauren froze. Her shoulders eased downward. I didn't raise my voice. And I have withdrawn larger amounts than this at this very counter. Many times. The room held its silence. Raymond stepped half a pace forward. His voice remained steady. For clarity, anyone handling Mr. Cole's account, or any customers, must follow procedure exactly. No adding steps. No removing steps. No improvising. He paused for a moment. The procedure exists. The error is in the person handling it. The temporary manager gave a faint nod. Lauren pulled her hands away from the keyboard. Another employee behind her adjusted his posture, as if receiving a message straight to the spine. Raymond looked around. This matter is closed. But I didn't leave yet. I turned to Terrell. Mr. Hayes, I said, tomorrow you start as Central Branch Security Supervisor. Higher pay, elevated access, and I will send a personal recommendation. Terrell was straightened by nearly half a vertebra. No need to smile. Just the presence of someone whose worth had finally been seen. I opened the envelope, took out 1 bill, folded it, and handed it to him. Not because of what you told me, I said, but because you said it. He accepted it without lowering his head, simply holding it the way someone deserving would hold it. I looked around the room one last time. Rachel, gone. Brian, no longer in the system. Lauren, reassigned. Monitored. Terrell, promoted. Pay increased. Raymond, standing like a period placed exactly where it belonged. And me, not the man they pushed toward the door, but the man they were forced to recognize for who he was. I turned away. When the glass door closed behind me, I saw the entire room pause for one moment, just long enough to show they had learned the lesson they once believed no one would catch. Outside, the evening lights cast a soft gold across the pavement, like a quiet reflection pressing down on everything that had happened. I stood under that still light, the envelope in my jacket pocket feeling lighter than its real weight. No applause, no declaration of victory, no headline, just a truth that would not be pushed out the door again. Have you ever watched a room realize, too late, that they underestimated the wrong person? And if you've ever been discounted because someone assumed you didn't belong, leave a single period, just to show you're still standing. And if stories of quiet justice like this resonate with you, you can follow Black CEO Tales, where we share about people who don't need to raise their voice to make an entire room see them clearly.